in thinking about regulation, it's like there's a core question here of who gets to decide what a business can sell to a consumer. Hey everybody, Andrew Smallwood here, Chief Customer Officer at Second Nature and host of the Triple Win Pod. I am joined by my friend and colleague, CEO and founder of Second Nature, Thad Tarkington. And hey, we just wanted to jump on, it's a Friday, we're recording this, and chat for a few minutes about a hot topic in the industry, which is junk fees. And I do want to preface this with, Thad and I are not licensed attorneys. We've probably watched a few episodes of Law and Order. We're probably not even bartenders, all that to be said, what we are is passionate participants in this industry. And we do care about the things that are happening that may be a little outside of our control, maybe to some degree within our influence, certainly things we want to be aware of so that we can put our business or clients' businesses in the best position to succeed and help their customers have great experiences. And so that's the place this is coming from. We want to have a real conversation, real dialogue here about the way that we're seeing things, and hopefully it sparks some great conversation beyond this is what we'd love to see. So with that in mind, Thad, I don't think there's a codified definition of junk fees, and so if I were to ask 10 people, I might get a few different answers about what is a junk fee, or what one person feels is a junk fee, another person may not feel is a junk fee, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, how you think about it, or how others might think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if I were to take the kind of blended answer of what I hear as a junk fee, it's generally paying a fee for something that has no value. It's not really driving any specific incentive. There's nothing in return. And I would further say that it's something that wasn't transparently stated, as a responsibility. So this is a fee, I'm living in a rental property. I had no idea if I did certain action, I'd be required to pay that fee. So again, not transparent up front, and I have to pay that fee, and I'm really getting nothing in return. And so, if you look at too, the White House, they put out a letter talking about some different kind of key points of, here's some renters kind of rights that are important. They highlighted a number of different fees. And again, I wouldn't say all these, are, maybe even classed as junk fees, but certain fees they just thought were, unfair to the resident. And, we'll talk about a few of those, but, like any regulation, it often starts from a good place. And you can look at some of these and say, yeah, there's certain situations. If I was that resident, that would be a tough situation. It doesn't mean it's a wrong situation, it just means, it'd be tough. And I think one of the easy ones they point out is, on the screening side, if you take kind of the edge case or kind of the extreme end of that, there's definitely people who applied to multiple properties and, may not have the best factors that are considered for renting in terms of credit score, income, criminal history, things like that. And so they're having a tough time getting a property. They might end up applying to multiple places. They start to rack up these application fees, right? And I think the flip side of that, what we hear from a lot of folks is, ultimately the job of, property manager is to place the best resident that's going to take the best care of the property, drive the best performance. And I think, I definitely believe in a performance kind of culture and, incentivizing good behavior. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, if you have a bad history, evictions, and things like that, why would somebody want you in their property? But at the same time, you can understand, hey, people, at some point, they need a second chance. And that's, I think, really the deeper conversation here. So something like that, not an easy answer. I would say there's definitely, at the end of the day, this is a contract between two parties that they're, kind of willingly joining into. So anything that's transparent, up front, that there, shouldn't be an issue with. But there is some conversation around, okay, how do we, streamline the application process? And I think for something like that, it's important that people get really involved, because there could be unintended consequences where it limits innovation and screening. Often you hear about the term regulatory capture. Regulation comes in and it kind of benefits an incumbent. It stalls innovation because there's nothing to improve here. We're told this is the exact way to do it. And I think there's a lot of innovative stuff coming to screening. And, that would be a negative. On the more ridiculous side, you hear things, there's articles out there where you see things like a January fee. And, get on the surface, it sounds ridiculous. What is a January fee? Not having more context, I can't comment on that specifically. But again, I would say like if there's something relevant, maybe there's a market, maybe there's some activity that happens in January, and it might have been listed up front, right? So if it's transparent, hey, there's a cost to do X, and people are aware of it, there shouldn't be an issue with that, and there's a real chance that there is a relative value for this, and somebody mistyped the name of it in their accounting system, and that's what it got put, right? So it's hard to know exactly, but again, it's good clickbait for an article, and I think we'd all be pretty bummed if we were in a property, no heads up, and you're like, hey, you're paying a fee because it's January, right? So again, I think a lot of legitimacy to some of the questions here, obviously really deep. But Andrew, anything from your point of view on key points to consider here in whether it's junk fees or this White House letter?
I like what you shared there. I feel like there's a couple dimensions of this, which is, in thinking about regulation, it's like there's a core question here of who gets to decide what a business can sell to a consumer, right? I think there's good arguments for, okay, there's certain types of products, financial products, et cetera, where for consumer protection reasons and even the business's own protection, hey, maybe there's certain licensing requirements or other things like that to ensure there's a healthy market there, that there's some reasonable considerations. There's other things where, hey, maybe it doesn't make sense for regulation to come in and it's just a voluntary exchange, right? Between two consenting adults, and the market's able to work that out just fine. I think about the other dimension here of who determines what price the goods can be sold for, right? And that's a lot of the tension here of, hey, what's government's role in this versus what can businesses and consumers, figure out between them. And then I think the other piece is who gets to decide, and this is, I guess, tied to price, but, what's valuable or what's not, and what needs intervention, consumer protections, as opposed to, again, letting the market kind of sort that out. And I think it's always interesting and sensitive with housing because it people need shelter. It's like a fundamental human need, right? And there's always been kind of that tension, I would say, between landlord and tenant historically. And thinking about just how do we make these decisions? How do we do it in a way that's making things better for, consumers, property owners, property managers is obviously how we think about things. And I think it's important to say, that there's no shame in making money in property management. It's something like we think about. It's like the shame, it's almost a shame not to make money in property management and aligning that value to making a difference for customers, right? Like there's no shame in making money as long as that money is put to good use. And I'm not sure I would define what good use is specifically. People will come up with their own answers there. But, I think that's where a lot of the tension and hot buttons are around this issue. So those kind of questions. It gets me thinking, Thad, like when you think about like other industries and how that might relate to what's going on here, like, does anything come to mind, or are there any examples you think of?
Yeah, I mean, so one, I definitely believe in a free market. I think, there are always pros and cons to anything. There's no perfect system, but ultimately, a free market drives innovation. And, to go a different route than maybe talking about, rent control and some of the, pros and cons of that. If you look in Canada, there's recently a bill passed saying social media has to pay for news. And I think the intention was, hey, we've got these news organizations, they're putting out, quality content, and, ultimately they're not getting properly compensated for that, but that's what's really driving, viewership. So it was almost this kind of, hey, social media is getting the money and news orgs are doing the work. And so it's funny that got passed, and they just said, okay, we'll not allow these news channels to show their product, right? And, not sure exactly where it's settled yet, but the immediate thing was these news organizations like, hold on, wait, like that's a big piece of distribution. That's where we get viewership. And it seemed to backfire significantly, right? They effectively just got cut out. And I think there's a question of like, why do people go to social media? Maybe they read some of the news and they definitely find it there. But social media has turned, everyone into a journalist to some extent. And there's plenty of people who've ground up built content and media businesses on social that are thriving in that space. And so I think it's an example of, in a vacuum, people are looking at going, wow, we think this is valuable. It's not fair. Let's regulate it. And instead it just, cut off access. And so again, we'll see where that lands. But if I look at an industry, I think we're all familiar with airlines. I was talking with Peter Lohman about this, and after the conversation, I actually went up and looked some things up to get better data on this. But we were talking about, if you look at an industry and say, okay, how do you really drive the most value? And ultimately, it's offering different levels of products and service, and it's being able to monetize certain segments. And there's premium offerings that can really drive high revenue. And so you look at an airline, the interesting stat we checked out is 12% of customers are over 60% of the revenue. So it's 12% of customers, 60% of the revenue. And if you look at an airline, most major airlines are public. Their profit margins are sub 10%. I think around 5 to 8%. And keep in mind, like, airlines are doing really well right now, right? And so in a slower market, that may change. I'm not an expert in the airline fundamentals, but ultimately in a good market, they're not eclipsing 10% in profit. So if you had to say, okay, if 12% of customers are spending 60% of the money and they're only making a 10% profit margin, if you actually take the total cost to operate and said, okay, we're going to spread that equally across everybody, it'd probably price a lot of people out of flying and really change the economics. And so, I think there's plenty of people who are happy to say, I'm going to bring a book bag and pay $50 for this flight on Frontier and sit in the back corner, And on the flip side, you've got people saying, look, I'm happy to pay $2,000 to get a little extra leg room and, a free drink, right? What that tells me is, if you look at, the free market, ultimately it said, these companies, it's about innovation. How do you create value? How do you create product offerings that people want to pay for? And then it actually, lowers the costs. Myself, I'm typically an economy flyer, and, I love that, people in the front are paying half my seat fare. And so I think, that's a key piece to kind of look at. Now, talking about fees, obviously, airlines, people always complain, bag fee, this and that, back to, square one. Hey, if you took away bag revenue, I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but if you took all these things away, like, the money has to come from somewhere. And so, what do you think is fair? That everybody just has to equally distribute? Or is it the person who brought 3 bags pays for the bags and the person who didn't bring a bag doesn't pay, right? So I think, really it's about how do you get that, like, choice, that flexibility. And, so I think as we look at the property management industry, a key thing that, Second Nature is really designed for is, how do you design products that drive accountability to key resident responsibilities? At the end of the day, you're living in a home, and it's an expensive thing to maintain. It's your basic expense. And the way that you operate in that home has a big impact to, ultimately the expense of running it, right? So how do you set up things that drive accountability, really drive the lowest cost, incentivize the lowest cost, and then also maybe offer some premium offerings where you can drive revenue and monetization that actually lowers costs for everyone. And so, I think, if you look at a lot of regulation that comes out, it ends up, ultimately there's some negative effects to the people to try to help. And so I think one key piece is we're looking at, this space age, or anything you want to add to that, or anything you'd say like that people can do to really get involved here, or, what should people think about and prepare for?
Yeah, I love the airline example. That, I think that's a good just analogy to think about and share, in the idea of, like, hey, if fees were capped for a first class flight, maybe there's a small percentage of consumers who like that, but then suddenly there's a large percentage of consumers that impacts in that maybe unintended way, or the business has to solve for it somehow. And so it really gets to, I like what you said about choice, flexibility, and bring that personalization of, the value prop and ultimately the product to really meet the needs of consumers, and how that ultimately maximizes value across the whole, to kind of create the best situation for everybody. So nothing to add there, but just like what you shared there. I think, as far as what people might do from here, I think we want to keep the conversation going. I know NARPM has organized a capital summit in February, and our VP of Legal and Compliance, Kim Godsey, will be there. We'll have other Second Nature representatives there as well. We'll be meeting, with legislators. The NARPM PAC is a great organization. We're also involved with the NRHC, which does a lot of advocacy and education. And I think it's one where there was a quote I'm forgetting, so it won't be pithy or anything like that. I'll paraphrase, but it's really the people who show up, that get to rule, if you will. And so, hey, if the only people expressing their voices, right, and the only side of a story is one or another, then we can probably expect there to be unintended consequences, right? And so how do we work together to make sure all perspectives are contributed here, and we're trying to make the best decisions together that we can to move the industry forward? And I think it's important that we do that. It's important that we pay attention and we're aware of anything that could be impacting the business and responding appropriately. So to that end, NARPM Capital Summit, shout out coming in February. Thanks to Keith Becker and Matt Tringali organizing what looks like a really great event. Love the direction they're taking this. Excited to support. And hey, we could continue the conversation in the Triple Win Property Manager Facebook group, or shoot us an email. We'd love to hear what you thought here as we're getting the conversation started. Any final words, Thad, on your end?
No, I love what you said there. Get involved and let's shape the future. So,
all right. Hey, everybody, that's it for this episode of the Triple Win Podcast. Thanks for listening to us wherever you listen to great podcasts, and we will catch you at our next event or social post or newsletter or wherever we see you next. Take care.
And that wraps up another episode of the Triple Win Property Management Podcast. Thank you for pressing play. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspiration.
The Triple Win Property Management Podcast is proudly produced and distributed by Second Nature, where we believe in a triple win, building winning experiences for your residents, investors, and your teams with the only fully managed resident benefits package. Visit secondnature.com to learn more and talk to an RBP expert in your area.
If you have any questions, comments, or want to weigh in on the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Email triplewin@secondnature.com. That's triplewin@secondnature.com.
Stay connected with us beyond the podcast. Visit our website at secondnature.com to stay updated with upcoming property management events and articles.
And don't forget, you can keep the conversation going in the Triple Win Property Management Facebook group. It's exclusively for property managers.
To receive even more valuable insights and updates, subscribe to our newsletter. You can find the link to that and much more in the show notes.
On behalf of the Triple Win community, this is Laura Mack, thanking you for tuning in.
And on behalf of Second Nature, this is Carol Housel. Check back soon for another exciting episode.
Until then, keep striving for that triple win.